Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at an incident that I think is going to be pretty interesting for you guys.
Yeah.
It's the assassination of General Kirillov.
Right.
Now, General Kirillov was the head of Russia's chemical and biological defense troops.
Yeah.
And he was assassinated in Moscow.
That's correct.
And the main source that we're looking at for this deep dive is an interview with a former Israeli intelligence officer.
Okay.
And this guy breaks it all down. And there's some pretty interesting things in here.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I think this will be a really, really good deep dive for you guys. So just to start off, what makes this assassination so intriguing? Well, for starters, there are some glaring security lapses.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So think about this. A database was leaked that contained the addresses of top Russian officials.
Wow.
Including General Kirillov's.
That seems like kind of a big deal.
And our expert finds this particularly interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's just not something that you would see in a place like Israel.
Yeah.
Exactly. You wouldn't find a high-ranking official's address so easily accessible.
Oh, no, not at all.
So what does this tell us? Was there some sort of major intelligence failure on Russia's part? Or was there something more deliberate at play?
Well, it certainly raises some questions, doesn't it? I mean, it makes you wonder if there are factions within Russia who might have benefited from his removal.
Yeah. Okay, that's kind of a disturbing thought.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the alleged perpetrator.
Okay.
So he is believed to be an Uzbek national.
Interesting.
And our expert pointed out that using foreign nationals in operations like this isn't uncommon.
Right.
It provides a layer of plausible deniability.
Uh-huh.
And they're kind of seen as expendable assets.
Yeah, that makes sense.
People who are less likely to reveal sensitive information if captured.
I see.
So they're basically pawns in a bigger game.
Right.
And this is where the expert's analysis takes a pretty sharp turn.
Okay.
He believes that there are signs pointing to British intelligence involvement. Whoa, hold on, British intelligence. Why would they be involved?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
So he bases his assessment on years of experience analyzing both Ukrainian and Russian intelligence methods.
Okay.
And he says that this operation doesn't quite fit their usual styles.
So how is it different?
Well, he points to the precision and planning of the assassination, and he compares it to some past British operations, like the targeted killings of IRA members in Gibraltar.
Wow. Okay. So if the British were involved, what would their motive be?
Well, he suggests a couple of possibilities.
Okay.
You have to remember that both the British and the Americans have been investigating allegations of chemical and biological weapon use in the Ukraine conflict.
Right.
And Kirillov, being the head of Russia's chemical and biological defense, could have been a really crucial figure in those investigations.
So maybe they were trying to silence him?
That's certainly a possibility.
I see.
Another motive could be aimed at destabilizing Russia and further tarnishing its global image. So it's kind of like a high-stakes chess match with each side making strategic moves and counter moves.
That's a good way to put it.
Now let's talk about Russia's response.
Okay.
We've heard some strong words from people like Medvedev, but our expert suggests that we shouldn't take those public statements at face value.
Really? So what should we be paying attention to?
We should be looking at the actions of Russian intelligence agencies.
Right.
They tend to operate much more subtly and strategically.
Okay.
So they might try to pinpoint and eliminate those responsible for planning and carrying out the assassination. Or they could use this as an opportunity to launch a disinformation campaign.
Yeah.
To sow discord among their adversaries.
It sounds like a very dangerous game of cat and mouse is about to unfold.
Yeah, with incredibly high stakes.
Especially with the ongoing conflict and the fragile state of any peace talks.
Right, and that's what we're going to be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so the expert really believes that this assassination could have some serious ripple effects.
Like what?
Well, he thinks that it could definitely heighten tensions between Russia and the West.
Okay.
And that could make it even harder to find a peaceful solution to the conflict in Ukraine.
So this one event could really impact the whole geopolitical landscape.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And to make things even more complicated, he brought up Donald Trump.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so Trump's back in the White House now, right?
Right.
And the expert thinks that this could really change things.
How so?
Well, Trump has always been more interested in political solutions than military ones. So he might see this as an opportunity to push for some kind of negotiated settlement.
Interesting.
Maybe he'll even try to use economic pressure on Ukraine to get them to the negotiating table.
Do you think that would work?
It's hard to say, but it's definitely a possibility. And then there's the question of what all this means for Ukraine's future.
Right. What did the expert have to say about that?
He was pretty pessimistic, to be honest.
Oh.
Yeah, he thinks that if Russia manages to take control of the Black Sea coast, it could be really bad news for Ukraine.
Why is the Black Sea coast so important?
Well, for one thing, it would give Russia control of Ukraine's access to vital shipping routes.
Okay.
And that would cripple their economy.
Right.
He even said that it can make it very difficult for Ukraine to survive as an independent state in the long term.
So you're saying that control of the Black Sea coast is like a point of no return for Ukraine?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how the expert sees it.
Wow.
But he did talk about the possibility of negotiations.
Okay, so does he think there's any chance of a peaceful resolution?
He thinks it's possible, but it would require a major shift in the situation on the battlefield.
Like what?
Well, it could be a clear victory for one side or the other, or it could be that the cost of continuing to fight just becomes too high for either side to bear.
Okay, so basically something has to give.
Exactly. And he also emphasized that any lasting solution would have to address Russia's security concerns.
That makes sense.
Because those concerns have been a major driving force behind this conflict from the very beginning.
Right. But given how much mistrust and animosity there is between the two sides, it's hard to imagine them finding any kind of common ground.
I know, but the expert thinks it's not impossible. He pointed to some other historical conflicts where countries were able to overcome some pretty serious differences through diplomacy.
Okay.
He thinks the key is to find a balance between acknowledging Russia's legitimate security interests and avoiding appeasement that could just embolden them to be even more aggressive.
It sounds like walking a tightrope.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Trump for a minute.
Okay.
If he really is serious about pushing for a negotiated settlement, what kind of deal do you think he could realistically broker?
That's a good question.
The expert seems to think that Trump might approach this whole thing like a business deal. You know, he's got that background as a businessman.
Right.
So maybe he'll offer Russia sanctions relief or some economic incentives.
In exchange for?
In exchange for a ceasefire and a withdrawal of their troops from at least some areas of Ukraine.
Do you think other countries would go along with that?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of people would probably see it as a betrayal of Ukraine.
Yeah, rewarding Russia for their aggression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Trump could argue that it's the best way to stop the fighting and save lives.
I guess so.
He could also say that it's the best way to contain Russia and prevent the conflict from escalating even further.
It's definitely a controversial approach.
It is, but it would be consistent with how Trump has handled things on the international stage in the past.
Right. He's always been more focused on deal-making than on upholding traditional alliances or ideological commitments.
Right, and that's why his return to the White House could be such a big deal in this situation.
Yeah, he could completely change the dynamics of the conflict.
Yeah, and he could end up pushing for a resolution that might not be ideal.
Uh-huh.
But that might be the most pragmatic option available.
So it sounds like Trump's return is a real wild card.
It is. It could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. We just don't know yet.
It all depends on how he plays his cards.
Right, and how Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union respond to him.
It sounds like we're heading into a pretty uncertain and potentially volatile period.
No doubt. So is there anything else that the expert said that we should keep in mind?
Yeah, he made a point of stressing the importance of understanding the historical context of this conflict.
Oh, right.
He argued that a lot of the current tensions stem from long-standing grievances and unresolved issues that go all the way back to the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Wow, so it's not just about what's happening right now.
No, it's about all the baggage that both sides are carrying from the past.
That's a good point.
It's a reminder that even the most current events are always connected to history in some way. So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how we as individuals can make sense of all this information.
That's a great topic.
Especially in a world where there are so many conflicts and so much information coming at us from all sides.
It can be overwhelming, for sure.
It really can. So what do you think? How can we stay informed and critically evaluate the information we're getting?
Well, that's something that I think we're going to be exploring in the last part of this deep dive.
Yeah, you know, for me, what really stood out from this expert's analysis was how much he talked about the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah, that's so important. And it's something that we don't hear enough about.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in all the geopolitical maneuvering and the power plays.
Absolutely.
But we have to remember that there are real people whose lives are being turned upside down by this.
Yeah, he kept bringing it back to the individuals, the soldiers on both sides, the civilians who are caught in the crossfire, the families who have been torn apart.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that these aren't just abstract political moves. They have real consequences for real people.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the assassination of General Kirillov, I'm left with this question. In a world of, shifting alliances, escalating conflicts, and just a constant flood of information, how can we as individuals even begin to make sense of it all?
That's $1 million question, isn't it?
It really is. How can we stay informed? How can we critically evaluate the information that we're getting? How do we avoid getting swept up in the propaganda and the spin?
It's tough. It requires us to be really active and engaged with the information that we're consuming. We can't just passively absorb whatever's being thrown at us.
Right.
We have to be willing to question things, to seek out different perspectives, and to really think critically about what we're seeing and hearing.
It's a lot of work.
It is. But it's so important. We can't just check out and disengage from the world.
No, we can't. So to everyone listening out there, keep asking those tough questions. Keep challenging the narratives that you come across, and keep looking for those human stories that remind us why these issues matter so much.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of informed individuals to actually make a difference in the world.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the assassination of General Kirillov.
It was my pleasure.
We'll be back soon with more thought-provoking topics and insightful analysis.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.